you. Let me get this on here. Might need it. And this morning, we're going to be talking about, and we've been talking about, as you know, these ideas about callings. And today, we're going to really talk about the idea of a pilgrimage. Next week, we're going to talk about answering a calling again and adding to that. But basically, what we're looking at is this whole idea of what is a pilgrimage and what is a calling. And how does it come to us? And Rabindranath Tagore is a Nobel Prize winner in 1913, the first Asian ever to receive a Nobel Prize, and it was in literature because he was a great poet. And his spirit is showing up right now. Anyway, thank you. Isn't she much prettier than I am up there? Huh? Yeah. A wonderful distraction. Thank you, Katrina. He wrote a poem called The Call of the World. And just listen to this because I think it's important as we start to understand what a calling is and maybe where it comes from. That which oppresses me, is it my soul trying to come out in the open, or the soul of the world knocking at my heart for its entrance? Interesting enough, our callings can come from two different directions. It can come from that which is within us that is calling out and has a new thought, a new idea, a new way of trying to find themselves. Or it can come from the world knocking on the door of our hearts. Most of us watch the news when we do, and it doesn't move us very much. I don't think. Okay, even major catastrophes once in a while will move us, but we become kind of like, okay, the press is kind of like used to it, and we're used to it. But yet it sometimes, and something comes up, it has a calling to our heart. And we ought to listen to that and pay attention to that because it's how we truly find ourselves. A calling is a pilgrimage. It's a journey. It's a rites of passage. These are some of the words we use in describing a calling. And in order to experience the calling, we must be willing to take a break from our ordinary life. I mean, maybe for a while you have to stop washing the dishes. Maybe for a while you stop cleaning house. See, I got all kinds. See, so far we're doing good. And and maybe you take a break from work. Yeah, without pay. Oh, okay. Now we're getting now it's getting tough. Okay, and so what happens though is that we've got to find a way to cross over. The Hindi or Sanskrit word for pilgrim, a pilgrimage site means a ford, something you go through, a crossing place, a point of transit, a point where you're willing to make a change in your life so that you can experience a change in your life. There are these ideas that I would call these trinity of a pilgrimage. The most common is the hero's journey. There's a sense of separation, and you have to go out into the world. You have to make the journey. There is a sense, not a sense, but there is the initiation, what you learn on the journey. And then there is the returning of the hero's journey. And sometimes that can be, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes, the most difficult part of the journey is the returning. We have the same process that we see in the 12-step program, that we need to surrender. We need to struggle through some of the other steps. And then we find ourselves in recovery. But we always know that we are in recovery. It's always there to remember that I am in recovery from some addiction that I have. And there are many, many addictions. My simplest definition of an addiction is one that separates, anything that separates me from God or my experience with God. That is a form of an addiction. It can be shopping. It can be worry. It can be anxiety. It can be anger. It can be the lack of forgiveness. It also can be drugs and alcohol and all the kinds of things we've learned to call addictions. But it's a whole array of things, and it's the only one that affects me is that which keeps me away from my experience and my awakening of who I am. You know, sometimes we, on a journey, open a door, and then we're willing to step over the threshold to the other side of the door. And then what happens is that we leave our old life behind. We experience a transition, if you would, as we move through the door. We begin to see life differently. We see ourselves differently. And when we open the door and return back to where we were, we're not really where we were. We are changed. We are experiencing something different because we've made that transition. As I said earlier, in order to experience a calling, we must be willing to take a break from our ordinary life. And one of the keys to a calling, to figure it out, is questions. What kind of questions do I ask myself? You know, I kind of believe, and we're talking about this in the Course in Miracles, that the original sin concept, that goes way back to St. Augustine, is the idea that because humankind became separated from God, it was a sin. What I believe really happened is that whenever reflective thinking started, they say about 25 to 30,000 years ago, and maybe even further back than that we were able to start to ask questions. Who am I? And what am I? Where am I? Why am I here? And those kind of questions are a sign not of separation, but a sign of evolution. You see, I think we have been evolving the whole time, that we didn't come out of original sin. Adam and Eve, our society, our humankind did not create sin by asking those kind of questions and realizing that they were individuals who needed to find themselves and ask the right questions. So questioning is so very important as we look at this idea of our calling. Questions like, what is my purpose? What do I belong to? What can I believe in? Who are my teachers? When am I going on this journey? And how do I get there? These are questions we ask. And so, the way we live our lives depends on the questions we ask. The questions we ask become the life that we live. So they are extremely important. Here are some questions that Sam Keene, a writer, gave us, and he said, and he was giving a contrast in how we ask questions to find a calling. He said, one question could be, how can I serve others? You've heard that. He said, but yet many people say, where can I get my next fix? He said, how can I be the most authentic? And he says, and yet others people will say, how important it is to me to know what others think of me. And he says, you know, a question can be, how can we balance the ecology with economy? And he said, the opposite question of those is, one, how can we make the most money? And don't worry about anything else. And we are changing, slowly but surely, in that direction of looking at ecology and economy being weighed together. But another question that can come up, how can we eliminate economy and live only for ecology? See, a different kind of calling. Looking at one side as not being good and the other side as being good, maybe. And so we get caught up in the good and bad when we get into those kinds of questions that he says. There's a story I want to share with you. It's about Anne Learn and Paul Trium. Anne and Paul lived on Lake Superior, I think in Minnesota. And one of the things that you may not know about Lake Superior is, number one, it's the largest inland lake in the world. Number two, it can have, on any given day, waves up to 30 feet. Okay? Now, I don't know how they measure that. Maybe it's 31 feet, I don't know, or 29 feet, but it's big waves, okay? Can happen. And normally, most days of the year, the surf along the circumference of the lake is really 7 to 8 feet. That's a normal day. Also, Lake Superior is the coldest lake in the world that does not freeze over. So, here is Ann and Paul, and they went to a garage sale together. They've been friends for years, since high school, each married to somebody else, and they found 2 seaworthy kayaks. Now, I'm not talking about the little things you see down here in the James River. I'm talking about big kayaks, okay? And they decided to buy them so that they can use the kayaks in Lake Superior. What an opportunity. And so they do. Well, the first trip out, Paul says to her, wouldn't it be great to travel all the way around the circumference of Lake Superior, which is 1,200 miles, and actually took 65 days. And she said, yeah, uh-huh. But you know, that little question planted a seed in her heart. And they continued every once in a while to bring it up. And as they brought it up, it started to become a dream. It became, for her, a calling. She said as she looked back after the trip that she realized that she was starting to recognize that her life had to change in some form or fashion. That things were not like she wanted them. And she had to find a different way of being. And so after 5 years and a lot of practice, they decided to take that trip around Lake Superior. So there was the beginning. There was the separation from the old and starting into the new. As they traveled around for the first few weeks, what happened was they decided to take different routes. And I don't know how you do that going around the circumference of a lake, but that's what they did. And so they parted from one another, and they were apart from one another for about a month and a half until they came back together as they were finishing their journey. Anne did 3 things while she was on the journey. Number 1, she journaled every day. Some of you are taking the artist's way. And some of you are finding that journaling is really, really great stuff. She journaled every day. Next thing she had is a prayer ritual, a way of praying and being every day that she was very disciplined with. And the last thing that she had was an open mind. An open mind that said, you know, what am I dreaming about? That looked at her dreams as an important part of who she was. Now, about a week ago, I started to say to myself, because I wasn't remembering my dreams once in a while, I started to say, I want to remember my dreams. I want to remember my dreams. And I'd go to bed and I'd wake up at night and I would remember a little bit of a dream and I'd write it down. I'm not going to tell you any of them because they're not really important. Well, they're all important, but they weren't important like telling you a story about them. So what I have found is that we can remember our dreams if we remember to remind ourselves. And it's really great stuff because you find in your dreams sometimes the opening to a calling or the calling itself. Well, that's the thing she was doing. And what happened is that as she went around the lake, she ran into storms that scared her to death. At times she didn't know if she'd make it. She went ashore several times, not planned. The kayak held up, thank goodness, but she was real concerned as to whether or not she was going to make it at times. So there was some fear in the calling, and there always is because there's the unknown in a calling. Spirit doesn't always say, well, here's your calling, and here's everything that's going to happen along the way. Matter of fact, if that happened, you probably wouldn't go on the calling, okay? Because it can be very stressful and very difficult, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Well, about a couple weeks out by herself, she came upon a site up on a cliff that looked like Stonehenge. Now, this is in Canada. And it looked like Stonehenge, and it had these stones all separated around. And so this was obviously a site for a ritual or a site that meant something to somebody at some point because they had built it. It was built. She said that she climbed up and went over to the site, kind of looking around and not expecting anything. And all of a sudden, she felt like she saw out of the corner of an eye a deer, a doe, that became frightened and excited. And then it was gone all of a sudden. And she, to this day, doesn't know if the deer was really there or if it was her imagination. But she recognized one thing. The deer was her. That she would get frantic sometimes with anxiety. She would get scared sometimes because she didn't know where she was going. And she was trying to find out. And she identified with the deer from the standpoint of the deer being a free spirit also. That when it was in the woods by itself, it didn't live in fear. Instead, it lived life fully, is what she saw and she experienced. And she wanted that because that's not the way she was living life. And so there's this ha-ha, if you would, this initiation that took place during her calling, during her journey. And she wrote all that down, and then she continued on the trip and found other situations, but that was the most aha experience she had. And she got back home. Now, if you go on a calling, if you part yourself a little bit from your life, however that looks like, if it's just meditating once a day, that's a change in your lifestyle maybe. Something's going to happen. And then as that happens, you have to return to what you think is your ordinary life. And you can't do it. It's impossible. And so Anne went back to her normal life. She said that 3 days after she got back, she was supposed to report to school to teach. And she said, I can't do that. So she gave up the teaching career. Now her friends and her husband thought she was a little nutty. And they couldn't understand. She said, if I'd done it again, what I would have done is I would have prepared before I left my husband for the fact that I might be different when I get back. You know, I know a number of ministers who've gone on sabbaticals for 3 months, and they came back and they resigned. Maybe not on the spur of the moment, but they actually resigned because it was not where they were supposed to be anymore, and they found that out through that sabbatical. She found out who she was supposed to be and the direction she wanted to go with her life. But she worked at trying to change that because she said it best, she and her husband had an efficient partnership, an understanding of what each was to do, and they did their work efficiently together. But there wasn't much after that. And she wanted more than that in her life. And so she started to go to counseling, and she and her husband worked for 9 months in counseling before they decided that this wasn't going to work any longer. And the wonderful thing is because she took the time to explain the differences, even though he couldn't feel them or experience them, they ended up parting as friends, and she took her children and she moved to Washington State. And she started a spiritual center based on helping people find their callings and moving forward in life. She went from a homemaker, teacher, to a spiritual guide and teacher. So that calling was huge for her. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that every one of you should go get a kayak and go around Lake Superior or any other lake, okay? But what I would suggest to you is that you keep yourself open to the questions. As we grow, we go through 3 stages of life, they tell us. Number 1 is we develop our ego. And that's important. I mean, you know, if you don't develop your ego in some form, you may not survive very well as you're growing up. And so the ego is necessary. It's not a good or bad thing, it just is. But sometimes our ego takes control of us because the ego is built around fear, not love. I think there's an ego of love and an ego of fear. And so the ego of fear gets in the way, if you would, of us growing. And eventually, at some age, we tend to have this calling, and that creates the opportunity for a transformation, which is a second phase of life. Now, the transformation may be over again and over again and over again. It's not a one-time thing. You know, we used to say, once saved, always saved in the Baptist church. I thought I thought that was a great statement because I could do anything I wanted next week, okay? And say, that's okay, I'm already saved. The truth is we are all already saved. We just don't know it. And we don't have to have anybody to go through except go within to find that salvation and to follow a guide. And the one we recommend in Unity is Jesus, our way shower. That he became Christed and we can do the same. And so we can have this calling, if you would, as we look forward. And we overcome the ego. And then once we do that, the third stage is stepping into our essence. Knowing that we are spiritual beings. Experiencing that and feeling that. And because we are somewhat complicated in our makeup, because we've had so many experiences, what happens is that we have to do that over and over and over again. It's not a one-time shot. Because there's different phases in our lives, different places in our lives, different people in our lives that we need to have that transformational experience with, as a part of. And so we are always, constantly, once we're aware of the need, transforming and transforming and transforming. And the longer you do it, the more you do it, the more opportunity you have to find who you are, truly who you are. And that's a manifestation of that which created you. You are created in that image, in that likeness. And it takes a calling to find that out many times. It takes the right questions to find that out. Prayer chaplains have a calling. Some of you sitting there are called to be prayer chaplains. You just don't know it. So if you have any inkling of just genuine concern about what is a prayer chaplain, what do they do, then go to the orientation today. And then you might say, okay, fine, that sounds kind of interesting. I'd like to take the training. And you take some training. And you say, that's not for me this year. Which is what the majority of people say who go through the training. That's not for me this year, but maybe next year. And so we start to continue to grow. Because a calling for prayer chaplains is one where they agree to be in prayer in a disciplined way. They are always prepared to pray with you and with themselves. They're always prepared because what they do is they build a sacred space. So when you walk up or when they call you on the phone, they are in that sacred space and bring you into that sacred space, which we call the Jesus Christ consciousness. And when they do that, they have an effect on your life. And as you'll hear some of them say maybe today or later, it's my life that got changed, not somebody else's, because it was truly a calling. And so I thank each and every one of them and those who have been prayer chaplains before. And once you're a prayer chaplain, you never get out of it. You just think you do. But everybody has an opportunity to share their love. And I appreciate that. And I know the commitment they make, the time it takes, especially staying prayed up. That's huge. And it's so important in the life of a prayer chaplain. So we have that calling. You know, Carl Jung said that life is a circle. It's a circle of life that begins from that which created us and brings us back around to that which created us. That's what it's all about. And so there's this circle of life that we hear about. And yet sometimes it feels like for some of us that we're not in a circle of life. You know, we're in a rectangle of life. We're in a square of life. We are really confused as to what life is all about. But what we are all doing and we have in common, no matter the calling, and there are many opportunities for callings today, my goodness, of different types. What we're all preparing ourselves for is to go back to that which we were created, to recognize and experience our wholeness, to know who we truly are, that we are spiritual beings. And it's in those callings that we find it out. It's in those callings that we have to work through the ego. We have to work through the past. We have to work through a lot of things. And so Anne just being at what she called the little Stonehenge. There were a lot of other things that were happening on the journey, she said. And those built and built, so that when she returned home, she returned as a different person. Whatever calling you might go through, maybe it's a calling to really get involved in the unity message, to really experience a transformation, to experience God in a different way. As you do that, remember that you will not return to your family the same. You will not return to your friends the same. Now, I'm not saying you'll end up with a divorce. I'm not saying there'll be all kinds of problems, but I would say to you that it is different. One last example. When I came into Unity, my family was really excited. My mother's side of the family was really excited that I was coming back into the ministry as far as they're concerned, because they had seen me as a licensed Baptist minister. And then they learned about Unity. And they kind of wondered, I think, and I'm wondering out loud for them, how I could send myself to hell that easily. Because some of them are pretty conservative about it, okay? And so what we have is a wonderful agreement. We have a loving agreement that we will honor one another and that we will not discuss religion at family events, okay? And I'm not sure that's healthy, but that's where we are. It was because I went through a calling and I returned differently, and it was hard for them to see me differently. And we've adjusted to that. And I've adjusted to it. Because some days I would love to have the family like it was when I was a kid. Don't we always think about that? And that's not going to happen. So I'm where I belong. They're where they belong. And I believe that with all my heart. And we honor one another. We really do. And we love one another. And so, when you have a calling, you're going to return a different person. And you may find some people aren't too happy with what you've come. And it's okay, because it's your opportunity to honor them, love them, no matter what they think. So ask yourself the right questions. If something really speaks to you at the heart level that you see on the news or that you know about in the community, and it really speaks to you, seek it out, check it out, and let it become part of who you are. And that's how we transform the world. We transform it by transforming our lives. We transform it by accepting a calling that's bigger than we are. And we transform it through the power of love being shared with each and every person. Thank you.